Elden Ring has many bosses, like a lot. Some of them are great and some are, well, kinda cheeks, not gonna lie. However, in this video I'll be talking about the remembrance bosses from both the main game and the DLC. I'm gonna be ranking them to see which is the best. I've realized I didn't make a video on this. I mean, technically I did, but a lot of my opinions have changed ever since, plus at the time the DLC wasn't out, so I guess it's time for yet another boss ranking video for Elden Ring. If you like content like this, then be sure to subscribe only if you want to, but without wasting any more of your time, let's get right into the ranking. Fire Giant. The Fire Giant is still my least favorite boss fight in the entirety of Elden Ring. Now the design of the giant looks really cool. I like the whole Viking aesthetic vibe that's going on. Now the issue lies with how he fights. The Fire Giant has a lot of health, especially in his second phase, so it's best to come with a bleed weapon because man, without that you're gonna be here for a while. His first phase, despite it being a bit boring, is still not that bad. All you have to do is hit his damaged area and then keep doing so until he transitions to the second phase. Now the second phase is where the real trouble lies. Remember when I said that the Fire Giant has a lot of health? Well, this becomes more apparent here. He obviously still has some weak spots like his hands, but you're gonna have a way harder time fighting him from the front instead of just focusing on his leg thumps, as he keeps moving his arms a lot. On top of this, he likes to roll around the arena and he has some annoying AoE attacks. Overall, the Fire Giant still sucks and is definitely my least favorite boss in the entire game. Commander Gaius. This boss is utter dog shit. I don't care what no one says. Commander Gaius is one of those bosses that could have had a higher spot if he wasn't so shitty. I mean, he has qualities that I like. His arena is open and looks really dope. The design is amazing as it's just a dude on a giant hog. His powers are cool too, but that's where the positives end because everything else about him sucks. First of all, every time you enter his arena, this man will bull charge straight towards you, and this wouldn't be that bad if the attack could be dodged consistently. I'll be able to dodge it one time, then let's say 3 tries later, it will always hit me. His attacks do massive amounts of damage and he barely has any downtime at all. I swear he will have some insane strings of combos where he will jump into the air, attack you with his lance, do some other shit, then after you think he's finished, nope, bro just immediately starts attacking you again. He barely gives the player any time to attack him, and again, this man does a lot of damage. To sum it up, the reason why he ranks super low is because he barely feels like he's made for this game. He's super fast, he has way too little downtime, has an attack with a shitty hitbox, does a crazy amount of damage. Now you might be saying, well, why not just summon Torrent? I mean, I did, but for some reason this man is faster than a friggin' F1 hypercar and can catch up in no time. So fighting him with Torrent is a recipe for disaster. But yeah, Gaius sucks and he's terrible, at least to me. Regal Ancestor Spirit. The Ancestor Spirit is definitely better than the last 2 bosses in terms of quality. It's not a very hard fight, but it can be annoying at times, mainly because the boss can heal itself and teleport far away from the player. These mechanics don't make it harder, just more drawn out and frustrating. The boss's moveset is pretty simple with a few stomping attacks, headbutts, and a spirit juice attack. None of these are too difficult to dodge, but they can catch you off guard if you aren't careful. While the fight isn't terrible, it does feel a bit boring after a while. The most interesting part about the Ancestor Spirit is the look and the atmosphere of the fight. The setting and the dreamlike environment makes the fight feel unique and otherworldly. However, once you get used to its appearance, the fight itself becomes a little repetitive. Overall, the Ancestor Spirit is not a bad boss, but it's just more memorable for its visuals and setting rather than the challenge or excitement of the actual fight itself. Now let's move on to C tier, and the first boss here is none other than Asel, Natural Born of the Void. Asel is yet another boss I've come to realize is a bit overrated in terms of quality. Sure, don't get me wrong, he looks sick and the whole alien vibe is cool and all, but his attacks, while beautiful looking, tend to kind of feel not super engaging, I guess is the best way to put it. He's just stationary most of the time and he oftentimes do this triple gravity blast thing that for some reason feels awkward to dodge. Again, design is great, just this feels a bit, mediocre in terms of an actually engaging fight. However, I do enjoy fighting him more than the previous bosses I've mentioned. Putrescent Knight, yet another boss with very little downtime. I swear most bosses in this game, especially in the DLC, barely gives you any chance to hit them. They're always just moving around, it's crazy. And that goes for Putrescent Knight as well. In my opinion, this is what makes him a bit unfun. What's even crazier is the amount of damage he does. This man hits like a freaking missile. Maybe not as much as Commander Gaius, but he's a heavy hitter for sure. Now in terms of design, I actually really like it. He's another horseman fight, which is something I don't despise, and his arena looks freaking cool. Now the real main reason why I have him higher than the rest is because at least he doesn't have a lot of health, so fighting him isn't a slog, even though again he tends to move around frequently, which can definitely drag out the fight a bit. But this just makes me wish that in future titles they'll hopefully make the bosses have longer openings, or at least make the players fast enough to keep up with them. But yeah, Putrescent Knight gets this spot. Meteor, Mother of Fingers. Meteor is absolutely amazing when it comes down to visuals and design. The cosmic spacey vibe she brings to the fight is unique, and I love how her appearance gives off an eerie, otherworldly presence. Her attacks, especially the black hole beams, is one of the coolest and most beautiful looking attacks in the entire game. Visually, she's top tier. However, despite how incredible she looks, the actual fight itself isn't that fun for me. Her moveset, apart from a few standout attacks, is pretty boring and can get annoying fast. The fact that her entire body is a hitbox adds unnecessary frustrations, making it hard to find safe spots during the fight. Her attacks are also tricky to dodge, which I don't mind, but combined with the hitbox issue, it just makes the fight drag on and feel more tedious than challenging. Overall, Meteor is a great boss for visuals and atmosphere, and that's the main reason she ranks this high, but everything else about the fight feels pretty mediocre. She's impressive to look at, but the experience of fighting her doesn't live up to the spectacle. It's a cool fight visually, but in terms of gameplay, it's just not very fun. Again, it's not a bad fight, just pretty mid. Renala. Renala is a boss that starts off slow, especially on repeat playthroughs. The first phase where she's floating around in the library while you're dealing with her students feel a bit dull and not very engaging. It's more about finding the clones with the glowing aura around them and then killing them in order to break her shield, and yeah, that's pretty much the first phase. This phase can feel like a chore, and while it's not hard, it's just not that fun after the first time. However, the second phase is a big improvement, even though it has its fair share of issues. The fight becomes much more dynamic as Renala uses more powerful sorceries and summons to keep you on your toes. The beautiful moonlit arena and the overall atmosphere also adds to the experience, making this phase feel more like a real boss fight. Now, while the summons and sorcery can be cool, she usually spams the summons a lot, breaking up the flow of the battle. Most times I usually just ignore them and head straight to her. Overall, while the first phase is a bit boring, the second phase makes up for it with a better moveset, a stunning arena, and more engaging mechanics. Renala might not be the toughest boss, but she's certainly more enjoyable in the later part of the fight. Shadow Tree Avatar. The Shadow Tree Avatar fight isn't bad, but it can feel a bit drawn out. The boss has a large health pool, and this can make the fight take longer than necessary, especially with it having 3 separate health bars. While this adds some challenge, it can make the fight feel a bit repetitive and drag on longer than it should have. That said, the visuals of the fight are impressive, and the design of the boss is pretty cool. For what's essentially a giant moving sunflower, the Avatar has a surprisingly dynamic moveset. It uses a variety of attacks from the double-headed slam, the thorns it can summon from the ground, to the AoE holy attack, keeping you on your toes throughout the encounter. This makes the fight feel more interesting than you would expect from such a slow lumbering boss. However, the biggest downside is still the length. Even though the moveset is engaging, having to go through multiple health bars can turn what could have been a satisfying battle into something that feels like a grind. Overall, the Shadow Tree Avatar looks great and has some fun mechanics, but the long fight and repeated health bars make it less enjoyable over time. It's still not a bad boss though, far from it. Elden Beast. I've said this multiple times, but Elden Beast after the Torrent update became a way better boss. Most of my issues were that it would run away a lot, but having Torrent to easily close the distance makes things so much better. He also makes getting away from the Elden Stars attack much more easier. Overall, Elden Beast is a pretty solid boss that gets a bit too much hate in my opinion. Placidusax. Placidusax is an incredible boss when it comes down to sheer spectacle. His design, which looks a lot like King Ghidorah, is visually stunning, and his lightning based attacks add to the epic feel of the fight. Some of his moves like the teleporting lightning strike, the lightning nuke, and the double-headed beam attack are not only powerful but also looks amazing. They give the fight a larger than life feel, even though some of the hitboxes on these attacks can feel a little off at times. However, despite how cool the fight looks, actually battling Placidusax can feel like a bit of a chore. He has a huge health pool which makes the fight drag on, especially on repeat playthroughs. It's not that his tankiness is a problem in itself, but it can make the battlefield less enjoyable as you go through it again and again. The second phase doesn't help much as Placidusax starts teleporting around constantly, which prolongs the fight. Even if you've almost beaten him, you might still spend another minute or two just chasing him down because he won't stay still. While he's definitely a good boss and looks incredible, the fight's pacing keeps him from being truly great. making him feel a bit overrated in terms of engagement. Bale. I think enough time has passed, so I have a confession. I'm not really a super big fan of Bale. Now, don't get me wrong, he's a spectacle to behold. The lead up, the design, and his attacks are very cool, but just like Plasuda's axe, I feel like he's only good on your first playthrough, because fighting him on subsequent playthroughs just feels like such a drag, due to his enormous health and the fact that he moves around quite often. Personally, those two things don't go together for me, but again, Bale isn't a bad fight, it just feels like a drag. That's it. Godrick the Grafted. Godrick the Grafted is a solid boss overall. His design, while not my favorite, is still impressive in a horrifying way. The sheer number of limbs grafted onto his body along with the dragon head on his arm gives him a grotesque but memorable look. It fits well with his theme of being a twisted ruler desperate for power. In terms of his moveset, Godrick has a variety of attacks, some of which are delayed, making them tricky to dodge and capable of catching you off guard. He also has a lot of combos which can seem overwhelming at first. However, despite his aggressive appearance, he's surprisingly easier to dodge compared to Margit. His patterns are more readable once you've seen them a few times, making the fight more manageable. Overall, Godrick is a well-designed boss with a cool but creepy look and a fairly balanced moveset. He's challenging but not overly difficult, making him feel rewarding to fight. Fortisax. Fortisax is a decent boss, and after fighting him again, I'd say he's definitely better than Plasudasax. His animation feels more like what you'd expect from a dragon, making him more true to the creature compared to Plasudasax. However, Fortisax has one major flaw: the lightning attack that constantly locks onto the player throughout the whole fight. This move really drags down the overall experience. It's not difficult to deal with, but it feels like it's just there to frustrate the player rather than to add any meaningful challenge. It disrupts the pacing and makes what could be a more enjoyable fight feel unnecessarily annoying. That said, just like Dragon Lord, Fortisax is visually stunning. His design, along with the stormy, electrified battlefield, creates an epic atmosphere that makes the fight look amazing. If it weren't for that annoying lightning attack, he'd easily be among the top bosses. Rykard. Rykard is one of the only gimmick bosses that's actually really good. I know I've been gushing over the appearance of the bosses, but let's be honest, they do look really cool. Especially Rykard. He's straight up nightmare fuel, and his arena looks beautiful in a weird twisted way. Now Rykard can be fought with your regular weapons, but in my opinion it's just really boring to do so. But the way you're actually supposed to fight him is by using the Serpent Hunter, which generates large amounts of wind that can do a great amount of damage to him. What makes the Serpent Hunter great is it's not just one attack that you have to charge up, but it has a whole moveset of wind-based attacks, which makes fighting Rykard on subsequent playthroughs not feel like a chore. Speaking of attacks, some of his can be a bit weird, either because they feel almost impossible to dodge or just outright overwhelming, but this doesn't drag down the fight by any means, as it's still really good. Star Scourge Radahn. Fighting Radahn for the first time was an amazing experience. Seeing this giant towering behemoth of a man riding around on a scrawny looking horse was funny but cool at the same time. His moveset is varied and has some interesting powers and abilities, and his second phase transition was amazing. Now here's the issue I have with Radahn, and I don't know if it's just me or maybe other people have experienced this. Fighting him on subsequent playthroughs isn't as fun as the first time. I've said this before in a previous video, but it's true. All the excitement is truly gone when fighting him again, and some people may say that most bosses are like that, but I disagree. Some of my favorite bosses in the game took me fighting them 2 to 3 times for me to actually appreciate them. However, again, Radahn is not like that. Now that aside, is the boss fight itself terrible in terms of mechanics? Nope. I actually feel like after they patched his hitboxes, he became one of the better balanced bosses in the entire game. It's just that fighting him again isn't that fun, at least to me. But I do prefer fighting him again compared to the previous bosses. Now let's move on to A tier, Divine Beast Dancing Lion. The Dancing Lion was a boss that I was excited to fight after seeing all the DLC trailers, and when I finally got to him, it was not a letdown whatsoever. The scenery, the arena, and the design of the Dancing Lion itself made the fight feel very cinematic. Its abilities are what carries the fight in my opinion, as it can switch between lightning, frost, and wind. The lightning phase is the hardest to deal with, as there's just a bunch of lightning strikes he can generate around him, knocking you on your ass. His frost phase isn't too bad, but it can make it a bit difficult to see, and that's my main issue when it comes down to the Dancing Lion. The camera will fight you more than the boss itself. I swear, you could be fighting him normally, then the camera will just trip out on you, and what makes this even worse is the fact that the boss not only moves around a lot, but its attacks are very, how can I put it, unusual. Now, I'm not saying that those things makes the fight bad, but since the camera is kind of a mess at times, they low-key add on to the frustration. But overall, when the camera isn't tripping out, this fight is definitely one of the best in the entire game. Ramina, Saint of the Bud. I've mentioned in a previous video that Ramina is one of, if not the most underrated boss in the entire game. While she might not be my go-to favorite, she's definitely an amazing boss with an interesting design. Speaking of design, I've always been a fan of the whole half female, half arachnid thing going on in certain Souls titles. Her arena looks great as it takes place in a dilapidated church overgrown with the scarlet rot. Now let's talk about her moveset. She has a fair set of moves up her arsenal, but none of them are hard to counter or dodge. Now what can catch you off guard is the way her lower body works, as sometimes you will dodge a move from her, then she attacks you with her centipede part, then after dodging that she immediately attacks you with another centipede part. So be sure to always look out for that. Also, it's best to have a decent amount of stamina and recovery as she tends to move around a lot. But all in all, Ramina at the end of the day is an amazing boss that deserves more love. The man, the myth, the legend. He beat all the cases and he came home an innocent man. Well, he didn't come home because he's dead and we killed him, but hey, good for him I guess. Mohg is an interesting fight because at first I didn't really like fighting him all that much because one, you have to sacrifice a tier slot so that his second phase transition doesn't eat out your entire health bar. 2, he has a crazy amount of health. 3, he moves around a lot, barely giving you any time to attack. 4, his attacks hit like a truck. And 5, the blood fire everywhere in the arena makes it hard to position yourself. Now, after fighting him multiple times, I've realized that it was just a skill issue. His health is a lot, but nothing crazy. He does move around a lot in his second phase, but he definitely has some openings. It's just that you can't spam attacks, which is fair. His attacks does a lot of damage, which is to be expected by a late game boss. All of those things I understand, except for the fact that in order to make the fight less stressful, you need the blood tier, which is something I don't like. I don't know, having to find an item or equipment to avoid a bullshit attack in a boss fight, I don't know, I'm just not a big fan of that. The other thing I didn't really like about his boss fight is the fact that he just throws blood flame everywhere in the arena. And I understand he's the Lord of Blood, but man, this makes the fight annoying because you have to tiptoe and be careful of your positioning while you have this big ass man just flying around doing crazy attacks. I just don't see the point to it. But all that aside, I've learned to counter all those things, so his boss battle feels way better, and this is the reason why I put him at A tier. Consort Radahn. So Consort Radahn got patched and a lot of people were happy and some weren't for some reason, as the patch fixed some of his major issues. One of them was his hitbox with his cross slash attack, and the lighting for phase 2 is toned down a bit, so it doesn't feel like you're getting flashbanged when fighting him, but I guess some people just, like to get tortured, I don't know. Now if you've seen some of my previous videos, you might already know how I felt about Consort Radahn at the time. You see, my main issues with him was not because, oh, it's just Radahn. No, I actually really like Radahn as a character. The main issues I had with this boss was with the second phase. Again, some of his attacks were blinding, his downtime was non-existent, he would do a combo then immediately follow up with another combo, so he would have to squeeze some damage when he randomly decides to chill out. And mind you, he has a shit ton of health, so you're gonna be fighting him for a long time. His cross slash attack was probably the biggest issue as it was undodgeable unless you positioned yourself to the left or if you had light equipment load. And what would happen with this attack is that it will catch you off guard, you get hit by it, then get stunned by one of his holy beams, and then immediately he would follow up with another combo killing you. But okay, that was pre-patch Radahn. What about currently? Well, surprisingly, he's actually fun now, and at first I didn't think that the patch was gonna change my mind on him, but holy shit, he actually feels like a fun and somewhat fair fight. Now mind you, I was using the best holy damage negation spell and the golden braid, but even when I was fighting the pre-nerf version of him with the same equipment and a higher level, I was still struggling so much because of his bullshit. But now I actually didn't have to rely on any bleed or other types of cheese builds just to kill him. I just went in with my big ass hammer and it only took me around 4 tries. Now one of those tries I was bullshitting, so technically 3, and all of those first 3 tries I was really close to defeating him, and when I died I didn't feel like it was, bullshit. I knew it was my fault. So yeah, I probably still need to find him with different builds, but as of right now with the build that I used, he was really fun, and I'm glad they patched him because before the patch he was one of my least favorite bosses in the entire game, but thankfully he's actually fun now. Rellana, still one of my favorites in the entire game. I was contemplating putting her in S tier, but I think A tier is fair because I really like her fight and I love her visuals, but there's just something holding her back, and no, it's not the lack of cutscene. I do wish she had one, but it's not that. I think it's because of the small amount of downtime she has after doing a combo. She just does not stop, and her elemental attacks, especially the magic ones, does so much damage. At least they place a resistant talisman in her region, but even with that, she still does a lot of damage. Now I found the best way to fight her is to use the deflecting hard tier, as you can counter most of her combos and then potentially stagger her with an heavy attack. In my opinion, it's the safest way to deal with her, especially because her arms have a separate life of their own. Overall, despite having little downtime, she's still a great boss and is still one of my favorites. Malekith. Malekith is a decent boss, but his first phase holds him back, as it just doesn't feel engaging. His moveset is repetitive and there's not much excitement in dodging his attacks. It feels more like a chore to get through. However, once he enters his second phase, the fight gets a lot better. He's much more dynamic, flipping around the arena and making the fight feel more intense. His attacks are faster and more varied, and he opens himself up more for counters, which makes it more fun. That said, some of his attacks have hitbox issues, which can be frustrating, as if you get hit once, it's basically GG's. His double sweep attack, for example, sometimes hits even if it feels like you've dodged it perfectly. The ground slam has a similar issue with its aftershock catching you off guard at times. His spin and flurry attack is another tough one to avoid. Even though you're supposed to move to his side, it often feels like no matter how fast you go, you still get caught in it. Overall, while the second phase is strong, these issues can take away from the experience. Now, the reason why he still ranks pretty high is because despite these things, I've had a lot of fun fighting him, even compared to the previous bosses that I've mentioned. Morgott. Morgott is a fun boss overall, with a good mix of challenge and excitement. His moveset is varied and it keeps you on your toes throughout the whole fight. My favorite is when he summons the raining swords. There's a nice balance between his attacks where you have to time your dodges and look for openings to strike back. The fight has a steady rhythm and it's satisfying when you can predict his moves and counter them effectively. However, the only downside is that some of his faster paced attacks can be frustrating to dodge. They can come out quickly and it feels like you don't have enough time to react. This makes it easy to get caught off guard and take unnecessary hits, which can interrupt the flow of the fight. Despite this, Morgott still offers a good challenge and remains an enjoyable boss fight. Now let's move on to S tier. These bosses are the best of the best. And the first boss here is Midra, the Lord of Frenzied Flame. Going through the abyssal woods and stumbling upon this odd mansion was a creepy but amazing experience. When I saw this, I knew some shit was about to go down. And shit did go down, because here we meet an old man, and after killing him, he reveals himself to be the Lord of Frenzied Flame. I swear, the build up to this was amazing and the design of Midra himself is great. This is what I love about FromSoft enemy and boss designs. They're not something you would see in your typical fantasy or dark fantasy setting. It's simple but amazing. His fight is fun, as unlike most other bosses, he isn't too fast and his combos can be easily evaded. The Frenzied Flame buildup can be annoying to deal with, but that aside, fighting Midra is a great experience. Godfrey. Over time, Godfrey has worked his way up to S tier for me, and he's now my third favorite Elden Ring boss. His presentation is amazing, as in his first phase he presents himself as this noble warrior, and in his second he returns to his true primal nature. The fight itself is also fun due to how jumping is also a viable option now. Now I do hate how he spams a lot of his AoE attacks in his first phase, but that's only for a small portion. His second phase, while awesome, is a bit less fun than the first due to him mostly relying on hand-to-hand combat and grabs, but it's still enjoyable nonetheless. All in all, he's a phenomenal boss, and that's why he's at third place. Malenia. I've said this many times before, but Malenia used to be my least favorite boss in Elden Ring, and I'ma just cut to the chase. It's because of waterfall dance. Now don't worry, I'm not going to go on a rant about that, because ever since I've learned how to dodge it, she became my second favorite boss in the entire game. Her moveset is great and she has an amazing design. Again, less is more, and she can be tons of fun. Now if you think that Malenia is the worst boss in Elden Ring due to that shitty ass attack and the fact that she self-heals, I actually understand where you're coming from, and I'm not even going to try to convince you to change your mind, because everyone is entitled to their own opinions. So if you do believe she's dog shit, then hey, I can't argue with that, because I understand where you're coming from. But she's grown on me in the past 2 years, and I'm just a fan of cool blade wielding bosses, so that's why I put her at second place. Now my all-time favorite boss in Elden Ring and my third favorite boss in the entire Soul series goes to none other than Messmer the Impaler. What's crazy is that it took me fighting him like 2 to 3 times for me to come to this conclusion. He's an amazing and fair boss. At first he might seem super fast and his attacks may feel like they're made to punish roll spam, but you will soon realize that it's just a game of reflexes. Pretty soon you're gonna be dodging all of his attacks like nothing, and even then, he still makes for an engaging fight. Unlike most other bosses on this list that has some big major con, Mesmer doesn't have any. He's probably the most fair and fun boss on this list. I mean, his attacks do a lot of damage, but if you're on Shadow Blessing level 15 and have the fire resistant talisman, you'll realize that it's not that crazy. His attacks are fast, but you'll quickly get used to them to the point where they feel like slow motion. I know I've been complaining about bosses having very little downtime, especially ones where the bosses are fast and has a lot of combos, but Mesmer actually gives the player enough time to attack him, while still not feeling like a pushover. These are all the reasons why Mesmer is at the #1 spot and why he's my favorite boss in the entirety of Elden Ring. So that was my ranking of all Elden Ring bosses, at least the remembrance ones. Remember, this is just my opinion. Everyone's gonna have different views on certain bosses. Also, shout out to my Patreon members on the screen, Mac, Daniel Scotland, and Jabroni Jones. Thank you guys for the support, and thank you all for watching this video. I hope you have a good one.